Welcome everyone to another episode of Tea and Politics with Maya. I am Maya, and today with me I have really amazing speaker who is very, very interested in the topics that I'm interested: well-being and growth and empowerment and not having toxic workplaces.
Correct.
So welcome, Shweta. I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya.
Well, as you know, this podcast is focused more or less on power and empowerment and how this transition happens in societies, but mostly in Brussels. And we met through LinkedIn while I was venting about my Be Disappointing campaign. You had a very more positive approach to toxic workplaces, which is Better Brussels. So we'll go to that in a minute. But before we go there, my ever repeating question is, how the hell did you end up in Brussels?
Correct.
What happened to you?
Yeah. So I have to admit that I didn't even know where Brussels was when I was introduced to it. Call it my living in my own bubble in New Jersey in the US. I grew up in India until I was 16, and I moved to the US because of my dad's company transfer to New Jersey to set up an office there. And I had gone through life in the US, and I was working, and then I got an email from this master's program director that I was going through, and he messaged that, hey, there's a corporate social responsibility fellowship in Brussels, Belgium. So please apply, master's students, So I was like, where the hell is Brussels? And I was like, so I had to look it up, and then I was like, and I said to my colleague who was sitting rather next to me, and I was like, imagine going to Brussels, wherever that is, for a corporate social responsibility fellowship with a major pharma company. Like, imagine that, like what a crazy thing. And first of all, what is corporate social responsibility? So it was like a mess.
What is corporate social responsibility? What is Brussels? And you were like, yeah, let's go to nothing I know.
Correct. And for some reason, I think it's the way the email was worded that made me go like I know nothing, And then I looked up Brussels and I looked up corporate social responsibility. I have to say that even after looking CSR up, I had no clue what that is. And then I was like, maybe I need to just give it a shot. And something clicked in me that I gave it a shot, and I knew it was something that I wanted to do. And then I got the fellowship, and I came here into Brussels to focus on CSR. And I have to just kind of give your audience a bit of background. So I have a bachelor's in computer science. So I was a programmer when I was working, and I got that email. And I was doing a master's of communications for IT professionals. So I thought to myself that I'm in my 20s, if not now, when, to just kind of take this sort
risk,
of yeah. And that's how I ended up in Brussels. And then I met my husband-to-be, and then we moved back to the States, and then we moved back here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And this sounds like a very interesting mix. So you were brought up in India, but then New Jersey, and now Belgium. And
Correct.
How does this all correlate when it comes to your identity, culturally and personally?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I always do consider myself rather confused because
Your identity is confused?
Correct. It is, because every time I think I'm sure of something happens in the world where I just go, nope, I'm not, or I don't agree, or I agree. And through sort of my experience, I kind of figured out that none of us are a monolith, that none of us are one thing, And yeah, so being Indian, I think I know what it is to be Indian, but then when I'm American, that side, I'm kind of like, no, on this side, I'm American, but I'm not. And then I'm Belgian, and then on top of that, I'm like, live in the Flemish part.
So you're also Flemish. There's the Flemish layer of it all.
Yes. And every time I think, like I said, I think I know something, or something I feel very passionate about, it just shakes me because another part of my brain kind of takes over and confuses me. So I'm confused.
I love this answer so much. I can relate to this answer a lot. And I recently realized something very obvious maybe for everyone else, but that moving to Brussels, me as a person, I am accepting Brussels and Belgium in the different compartments that it is. And I'm accepting it. Slowly, I'm starting to like it even more.
Correct.
But then I recently realized, while going back to my hometown, back in Bulgaria, that for my children, this is going to be their hometown.
Correct.
So this is not just we move, we're going to live here for a couple of years, but this is their hometown.
Correct.
And it was a very different perspective. For the first time I had to Brussels, to a bit more of a, from a loving perspective, that this is actually a shaping structural moment for my family to be here.
That's true. Yeah. It's something similar to me because I also, like my children go to a Flemish school and they have a Flemish father. But I always kind of remind them that they are like half Indian, you know, and the fact that they really don't speak their mother tongue, like their mother tongue is really their father tongue, and that's their reality, you know? And and then you kind of, you love this place for who your children, like who our children are becoming in this new thing called home, you know? And you want to do the best that you can to this new adopted country, you know, in a way.
Culturally and linguistically, I've also had a lot of challenges, I think, when it comes not that much to myself, but regarding to my kids. So I am learning some Dutch, I'm learning some French because I want to know it. But then obviously for work, what you need is English, especially in the EU bubble hemisphere. Yeah. But then last year, I also had another reflection regarding my children, is that, for example, me as Bulgarian, I really actually find it important for them to know properly how to read and write in Bulgarian. Correct. And it was a new discovery for me because I didn't know I needed that.
Correct.
But difficult.
Yeah. But you know, when you were saying, I was just thinking, like, this is the beauty of Belgium that I wish that we embraced a bit more, because in just what you were saying, you know 4 languages.
Yeah.
Like 3 European languages, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think this puzzle is also reflected to what we're going to talk about, the workplace environment. Yeah. It's very charming, but it's also dreadfully difficult to juggle with that.
That's true.
Okay. We paused with your fellowship, so you are already in Brussels. Yeah. And what's professionally happening to you? How did you evolve career-wise?
Yeah, so I mean, I hated it. I have to say, no, I really had an identity crisis, because as I was trying to learn about corporate social responsibility, I was seeing discrepancy in what we were preaching and what was happening, you know? And I was thinking to myself, and I also did not want to give the people who are the naysayers of CSR that much clout, because they were telling me it's an oxymoron, corporate social responsibility, you know? So I was like, no, this is rather like a company giving a shit about the community they live in, the responsibility they have in manufacturing their products, you know? And when I was going through that, and rightly so, the employees within the company would come to me and say, hey, Shweta, thank you a lot for putting yourself out there from the CSR team, you know. But hey, look, I'm working on this, this product for, rare diseases, but I don't seem to get the funding because it's not within the business scheme of things. And how is that CSR? You know? And I was like, yeah.
How is it really?
Yeah. No, but a very valid question. And it kind of taught me that, first of all, it taught me like how important it is to be outside our bubble, because I was surrounded by really well-meaning people who were really doing a very, very good job in the job that they were doing within the department. But the reality of the people that are like our closest, like people who are living on the other side of the building, had rather very clear questions. So to answer your question, yeah, I I struggled a lot identity-wise on what is corporate social responsibility in Europe. How does that differ from corporate contributions in the US? And then, I started to think a little bit on what does that mean for me? Let me focus on what can I do with this information and this experience rather than just pointing fingers at somebody else and saying, you're not doing it right, or you don't get it. So, and also, through growing up, I guess, I kind of told myself, like, let me focus on things that I can control, and the things that I can't control, I need to let them be.
Oh, that is a very mature way of seeing things.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the companies now with DEI or ESG or whatever the abbreviation everyone is stuck with, or CSR, I think that they're having a structural problem with the whole concept of it. So should just this be something external that you report and you're proudly putting on your website, or is this just an integral part of how you run your business?
Correct.
And I think that this is where you can see also the maturity of the leaders who are behind the companies. Because apparently, of course, it's not about just putting things on your website. It is about actually caring about how you impact the surroundings, the environment, the climate, the people that you work with.
Yeah. So it's the latter, right? So I think we all know in many ways that it's the latter. D&I, CSR, ESG needs to be integrated within the business, right? And I'm very happy that people have been calling leaders and organizations bluff a lot more now. Or we have been, and we are no longer naive. I think I always say this, that we are working with an rather engaged workforce. People have social media in the tip of their fingers. They have their colleagues that they speak to. You have informal coffees. And we are in many ways everyday activists, right? We want to see what role do I play, And even if you don't want to do that, and not everybody is a monolith, like I say, a lot of people ask themselves, when I go back home, what am I doing for my family? What am I doing for my community? What am I doing for my children? Like we are discussing, So people are, it's just innate in us, and it's not something of this generation or others. It's just something we care about, like people we care about, things we care about. So I do think that these things should be integrated, but I have another 2 points that I want to make is we have created a system, which my husband clearly explains it to me, that is built on one pillar rather than 4. So when you're building a house, for example, the house is built on 4 plus pillars, But today we are living in a system where the system is on one pillar, the economy, and that's it. So when the economy goes like this, obviously everything shakes, So I just would like another, and I don't think I'm saying anything new. This has been in conversation since the 80s, where people are saying, should economy be the only thing that we care about? And is that the only system that we should be following, And didn't we create all these things, organizations, companies, civil society, like all innovation, like a Brussels favorite word, like didn't we create these things to solve our given problems, So where did that go? Where did we go? I think a lot of us know where we went, but this whole focus on this one pillar on economy puts it at a very shaky ground.
But I think that's very true. I do agree with your husband, but I think that this is also the problem, is that we don't publicly admit politically that this is the case.
Correct.
That we somehow sugarcoat it with different things.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, it is the economy that is in the center of the political agenda, and it is in the center of how companies are run. On the other hand, of course, you have a business, you want the business to profit, because otherwise it will cease to exist.
Yeah.
But then there has to be some type of balancing around. And what's the second point? You said there's 2 points.
Yeah, and the second point is the fact that I am also mindful of how much pressure we put on leaders to deliver on business and profits, on top of that D&I and CSR and ESG and stuff like that. So though I think that all these things should be integrated, I am a big proponent of people's lived experiences. You know, nothing, no amount of statistics, no amount of research means anything if it doesn't relate to people's lived experiences, you know. So sometimes that's why the conversations around what's facts, what's truth, the non like the trust issue that we have on almost every institution today, you know, the news media, the EU institutions, the governments, every government, you know, every country and what it represents, every person, you know, policy people, comms people. We are all kind of struggling with how do we build trust. And sometimes I think, you know, people's lived experiences just are rarely considered, you know, and because of that, huge disconnect happens. And when I say this again, I'm the confused one because I think stats matter, you know, research matters, you know. But I think that a lot of times I can understand why people don't believe in the research or don't believe in facts, because they have lost trust and they see that their reality is very different than what the stats may say, you know. So yeah,
that happens very often when we also speak about generally, not only about companies, but generally about the labor market. And
correct.
I think that having in mind that this layer of what you said about the economics, yeah, well, obviously the economy is what pushes the world around. Therefore, our work becomes the center of our lives, correct. Which is the saddest story of the 21st century in my perception. And having a toxic workplace, I think that this is where you actually really lose the grasp of how your life develops, because you're so much focused on work. And if work becomes toxic, it just sucks the life out of you.
Correct.
And you've had some experience with that. I've had some experience with that. And we had a very motivational pre-talk about sharing traumas.
Yes.
But let's maybe have a step back. How did you... what's your take on toxic workplaces now?
Yeah. So I put my experience, I named my experience as toxic work experience, but like I said, I'm always confused. I have been struggling with that on, am I calling something toxic when it has just been difficult, you know? And I still to this day struggle with my experience and calling it toxic. But then when I see the amount of people who go through certain experiences in a space that takes up 80% of their life, then I tell myself, yes, we should call it toxic. Because I think that if our entire livelihoods and who we are today as humans, you know, roaming the world and doing things, if so much of our time goes in an environment that is not enabling, then we need to call it rather a harsher word. And yeah, I think to myself that toxicity, it is a rather strong word, you know, but somebody's experience in a workplace can be toxic dependent on how they define it. You know, harassment, discrimination, no clear roles and responsibility definitions, or micromanagement, microaggressions. All these are rather subjective things, and we are all very different beings.
And there's, I think, very different nuances within toxicity. Correct. Because even only from the few of the examples you gave, I would qualify some of those as uncomfortable, some of them as unethical, and some of them are actually illegal. So there is very, it's like a spectrum of what toxic is.
Yeah.
What do you think is you start with some examples, but what are the preconditions of a workplace to become toxic?
I think the first thing is power from my perspective. Whenever a leader or an organization or a system like Brussels, EU policymaking space, I know I give Brussels a bad name, but I'm really speaking about the policymaking space. As long as power runs wild, then it gives rise to toxicity. It's a given, because with power, you have two sets of people who take that power as a privilege to do good, and then they take that power on the other side to really not be to fulfill their own agendas, to fulfill their own ego, to to make themselves continue to be relevant throughout their career, and that's delivers some really bad experiences as an employee, or a team member. And so for me, to answer your question, it's power.
I want to go back to a sentence that you said about, because I'm not sure if you have used it in a humorous way, but giving Brussels a bad name, and I really want to elaborate on that, because I have been receiving this feedback as well.
Okay.
Maybe not the majority of the feedback I'm receiving regarding my court case, regarding the podcast, but there are some voices, prominent voices of the Brussels EU bubble, who are saying that that's not helping. Like,
Correct.
Just put it in in one sentence. I disagree with that, and I'll also ask you to elaborate on this. But I think that showing what's in here, we're not the bad guys. This exists, and I think that how power is distributed or not redistributed, and how power is transparent or not transparent, and accountable or not accountable.
Correct.
It's not the whistleblower who needs to be taking the criticism.
Correct.
It's the system.
Correct. Absolutely. And I rightly so, during Better Brussels listening sessions, people have said, people use toxic work environments, or the word toxic, rather very easily, very loosely, and I have to, I need to listen to them, because it's their experience, and it's I am no authority to invalidate that experience, But I think that it's a question we have to ask ourselves, that it's really important that shame changes sides.
Yeah.
Like, how are we blaming not the victim, but the sufferer, or the employee, or the team member? Like, if any of my team members ever came to me and said, rightly so, things that they don't like about my managing them or my managerial skills, it is a moment to introspect and ask myself, am I really doing that to this team member that I have? So from that perspective, I really think it's a very Brussels-esque problem that I want to spotlight. And that doesn't mean Brussels is some special thing in the world that it does this. It happens everywhere, but we live here. This is what we are starting to call home. Majority of our time is spent on working in this space. So I ask myself, shouldn't shame change sides? Should we always be only blaming the people who call this out? Shouldn't it really shouldn't the what do you call it?
The perpetrator.
The responsibility fall on those perpetuating this, and also to those who are like, that's the brilliance of the listening sessions, that people who are there are not always necessarily EU bosses. These are people who eventually want to be EU bosses, and they come to the listening sessions to share their experience and kind of say that, I don't know how it should be, but maybe this is not it. or maybe what I'm exposed to is not it. And that I think Brussels should really cultivate, because here are people with self-awareness to say how things are being done are not the way it is. I don't know the answers, but maybe I need to be amongst a group of people who want to find out.
At least ask the questions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Shame changing sides. I think that's a very powerful statement. I had my fair share of feeling shame and feeling ashamed for, I would say, maybe around a year and a half. While I was still in the job that eventually I got fired from, for asking to be paid fairly. It's very strange for me now to remember how I felt, because I really felt ashamed for being in a gender pay gap situation, which now, saying out loud, I realize fully it's ridiculous. But yet I was feeling like that. I was waking up with, I'm not worth it. I'm not deserving of anything. I'm not a good professional. And yet all of the objective evidence from my work were excellent. But yet I was not feeling pride. I was feeling shame. And when eventually I got fired, I was so deeply, fundamentally ashamed of myself, that I've been such a unworthy person that I don't even deserve a job.
Yeah, no.
And that takes time to work with. And now, again, I could hear myself saying this, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, come on, don't be that. But then I was feeling this way.
Yeah. I mean, I also want to share that I don't think I have these things all figured out, but at the core, I know that people like us are at the very least kind of saying that this shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And why and this is exactly what I want to tell the Brussels crowd is gender pay gap in your case. In my case, I cannot even define it, but let's say just taking your example of gender pay gap, what does a directive mean if the lived experiences of people don't reflect it? So that's why I always think that original question of yours, CSR and D&I and, ESGs, what does that even mean if nothing is implemented at the core lived experience level, So that's why I always, and I there are a lot of people who would like a better Brussels to eventually become a little bit more, go towards the policy bit. And I'm thinking that through, but I just don't have the patience, or I also don't want to go that route, because I know policy change takes enormous number of years and we are so far behind.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to point out one other thing about your example is a lot of times in Brussels, we hear everybody say, oh yeah, but that's a US thing. Oh, that Harvey Weinstein, US thing. Amber Heard and whatever, Johnny Depp, US thing. Or, unfortunately for my home country, my birth country of India, gang rapes, far away, But I think to myself, are we really living in such oblivion that these things don't happen here? Gender pay gap, Hollywood actresses have been talking about that for ages. And here in Brussels, you have concrete examples of people going through it. And I think I would love, you are taking it on your hands to fight this thing and become an example of it, to say and I would love for the Brussels press or just people to say, hey, look, this is also a European problem. I think we all know it, but I think what takes on a lot of the airspace is the US problem, and rightly so, Europeans calling it out.
I think that it's a very uncomfortable topic. Not only the gender pay gap, but generally to admit that in this prestigious, accountable heart of Europe place, there is a problem. And I think that this lack of comfort is just, it's easy to avoid it and just postpone it and procrastinate that eventually we'll have to talk about it, but not now. That's my feeling, because
that's a good point.
I've had a few conversations with people, not only from the perspective of people who are in situations like mine, or who were, or who are currently trying to get out, or who went to court, but just people who are like, yeah, I don't think that this exists. And I'm like, no, it actually happened to me, and I'm in court and I have the evidence. And yeah, even if it existed only for me, which I absolutely doubt, it exists. No, it doesn't exist. Yeah, it does. No, maybe you were wrong. Yeah, I actually was not wrong. It actually exists. So this on and on, I think that it's a problem of just admitting that this place is not as perfect as we want it to be.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but at least the self-awareness part, the oblivious part, I would like to see gone, where people just think, oh, it doesn't exist. Are you serious? Like discrimination. Like I have at my previous employer or client, I had somebody just randomly in passing by mention that, oh yeah, in Europe, we don't have that issue. Like Me Too.
Okay.
or discrimination. Okay. No, in European law, it's covered. Yeah, absolutely, it's covered. I mean, Belgium, I had, through a Better Brussels listening sessions, I found out that Belgium really has a lot of really good laws in place.
Yeah.
It has like really serious anti-bullying stuff in the legal frameworks and mental health coverage and stuff like that. But what do these laws mean if they're never checked on or implemented?
Well, I think that this creates this parallel system of where the laws exist, but they're not accessible. And I think that the precondition of a law or any system to work is then to actually ensure access to everyone. And I'm not sure I've mentioned that within the podcast, but what it means actually to sue somebody, to go after somebody in court, it's not about courage in many cases. It's about funds, and it's about resources. And it's about not only time and mental health and being mentally prepared to do that. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you need to go to court, obviously you've had something happen to you which was not nice. Which means not, as people say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Boo that. No, it makes you weaker and unhappy for a while. Eventually maybe stronger. But at this point, it's not only about you being strong enough, it's you being rich enough. Because to afford a lawyer in Belgium is not an easy thing to do, and it's not an accessible thing to do, even if you have the courage.
Correct. Amen.
Tell me about the listening sessions. Let's describe a listening. Is this a listening session now?
No, so I decided to do the listening session route because I just couldn't handle the amount of messages I was getting on LinkedIn after just simply writing an article, about navigating power plays in Brussels organizations. That's the title. And I just thought to myself, okay, I have to care about my mental health, and I just want to make sure that people have a space where their stories are heard, where, resources are exchanged, so that a coach's name or a law firm or a legal sort of advice or pro bono stuff, whatever it is, it doesn't stay with just me on the receiving end, or just with like a group of people who have been in Belgium for a long time, in Brussels space, So I felt that something needed to be done, but I thought, let me take a step back and not overpromise and underdeliver. Let's start with just a listening session, And then I said, okay, let's have a listening session, 1.5 hours. We're not trying to solve all problems in Brussels. We're at the very least acknowledging and sharing each other's stories and kind of push and pull. This is what I did. Oh, I don't know if you know a coach or... So that's what the objective of the listening sessions are, is that stories are heard, resources are shared. But then I took it a step further and told myself that there would be a tendency of people, hogging the space, and it may get a bit depressing. And if people don't have something concrete come out, or at least like a framework. So at the listening sessions, what I do is I just introduce and welcome everybody. And then I just say, hey, look, you'll see these post-it notepads around. We will kind of go through what does it mean for you to be in a safe, seen, and supported work environment? And based on the input that you give, we can kind of say like, hey, look, 3 listening sessions took place. We kind of brainstormed on what does it mean in Brussels to be safe, seen, and supported. And this is our message to EU bosses. Like, this is what it would mean for me to feel those 3 things in a workplace. So that, why? So that I can deliver my best work to the organization I work in. So I just literally just took what I know in comms is like stick with 3 messages, give people the power of listening, because I think 80% of comms work is a lot about listening, and 20% is doing. So I just kind of took my comms expertise and said, okay, let's do that. And so the next one is November 14th. And that'll be the final one, but let's see where it evolves into. But the objective here is to listen to people's stories and kind of share the resources we all have.
What's the feedback you've been getting?
People are asking, what are you going to do with this, A Better Brussels? What now? You know, you have taken up my...
How are you going to fix the world now?
Yeah, but I think I'm rather privileged because I have a set of ambassadors who take an active role in how they would like to see. And I have to give them a lot of credit because these are people, we all have day jobs. This is for everyone a side passion project. So they kind of go like, you know, what could A Better Brussels evolve into? I have 2 advisors, one of them who is a D&I expert, Tamara, and another person, Hannah, who is outside of this bubble. And so they kind of advise me on be careful on this, be careful on that, not from a protectionist point of view, but from lack of knowledge point of view. You know, that just because saying this doesn't mean blah, 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 or you're kind of becoming part of the problem, you know? So what was the question now?
What were people telling you after that?
Yeah, so I mean, people are telling me things like toxicity is a cop-out. So a lot of times people may use it when it really isn't a toxic place. People are telling me A Better Brussels should evolve more into leadership trainings that are desperately needed into this space.
They are.
But I am taking care of my mental health and also of those involved to make sure that we take our time, you know, we listen to people and we figure out what to do next. At the moment, I really don't know. Sometimes I have like a couple of days where I'm like, I know this is it and I go for it. And sometimes I'm like, no, I want to do this and that. And
well, that's the problem of having too many ideas. I will go to the leaders in a second. I just want to maybe explore a bit more how you see the link between, well, we already dissected toxic workplaces. And I want to speak about diversity and toxicity and how they correlate. Because in my experience, I mean, Brussels sees diversity as something that we work with, but the people who work with diversity are not very diverse.
Correct.
So
Correct.
That's a bit of my own observation as somebody who is coming from Eastern Europe, where, I mean, we have our share of challenges with diversity, and I've been presented with Brussels as having the answers.
Correct.
And when I arrived here, I realized that that's not the case, and that it's also actually been pointed by one of my friends, who is a regular listener of the podcast, that the diversity, even in our guests, European leaders, is not existent.
Okay.
So how do we work with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a loaded question. I mean, I'll tell you, I really distanced myself from the gender equality and D&I conversation from a conscious level because for multiple reasons. One, I think that I'm not an expert in D&I. I have my experiences, but I am not an expert because I don't genuinely, when I take a seat back, I don't really see what an ideal gender balanced place looks like. What does that experience look like? So because I'm not able to see, I'm not able to figure out what pieces are missing to get there.
Yeah.
To get there. Like, what do we need? This is where we want to go. This is all the things we could possibly test out, try out to get here. So that's number one. Number two is I genuinely think that Europe has an identity problem, and it's not alone in the world. India, we are suffering with an identity problem. The US suffering from an identity problem. We are just, so a lot of these conversations around gender equality happen at a very niche level, with the convinced speaking to each other, and then you have the add-ons, like people who say, oh yeah, we should talk about gender equality in the public affairs space, outside of public affairs, So I don't know how, and maybe some other experts may have a say, because I think that there are other really good organizations like the Good Enough Company, Harassment Support Network, Empower EU. There are more that are coming up that may have an answer to this, But from my perspective, I really don't know how gender equality and
my question comes not even from the place only of gender, but also from the place of the whole term of diversity, meaning employees with disabilities, and actually not
point.
even because I think that a lot of the times when we speak about people with disabilities, we envision somebody in a wheelchair working behind a desk, which is such a limited vision of what people are and what they can be, but also with how employees are. Because, for example, having an employee on the autism spectrum and how they relate with toxic workplaces may be very different from how I've connected. Or having somebody who is with the minority religion in the office, whatever that would represent in different contexts. So all of that, I think, amplifies the toxicity. But I'm also asking if you've had any stories on that.
Yeah. I mean, people do, point out the fact that, no, I don't. I guess maybe I'm just staying away from it as much as possible, because I find myself.
You feel more confident in the other areas.
Yeah, no, but I think you're right in pointing out the fact that, Brussels does say that it has answers to diversity, but does it? And a lot of times the people who are focusing on D&I, are they really coming from a D&I background? To be honest, I don't know. Like, as you can see, I genuinely don't have answers to these questions, because I don't know why I pinpoint on gender diversity. I think you're speaking about neurodiversity as well, and no, I really don't.
I think that it's a very healthy approach, the whole topic, to be not like opinionated on everything, and to just be like, I'm curious and I'm asking questions. So kudos to that as well.
Correct.
Leaders, what are we doing with the leaders?
Oh man,
what type of, you said leadership training, what do we need to train the leaders for and of?
Oh my.
Pen and paper.
I thought about sort of three things in my work around a Better Brussels in the evening, when I'm sitting next to my children when they're doing their homework, is I would really, first of all, would love for leaders to be enablers. I think we have forgotten, and I really have stopped calling them leaders, because you're not a leader. You're a manager. And once you have certain qualities, you become a leader,
Perhaps.
Yeah. But I think as people managers, I genuinely think you need to understand that you're an enabler of a given organization's or a cause's objective. If you're a people manager, if you have a team, your job, your core job is to enable people to deliver their best work, And if they're not, then it is about you taking them on a journey to get there, That's number one. Number two is I would love what I mentioned earlier is people within the Brussels space really need to acknowledge that it runs on power. And like I mentioned earlier, power comes with privilege or power comes with, unfortunately, the ability to abuse that power. Mm-hmm. So people need to ask themselves, okay, with the power I have, what am I doing with my power? Am I using it as a privilege to do good and to enable people to deliver their best work, or to enable the organization to deliver best work? Or am I doing it to abuse my power for my own good?
It's a very difficult question, though.
But I think being a leader is a difficult thing. And I talked about this in a post I wrote on A Better Brussels, on what does it mean to be a standout boss in Brussels, And a lot of times we need to ask ourselves, people really need to ask themselves a question, and including me, do I really want to be in management? Do I really want to manage people? And sometimes subject expertise should be enough. Mm-hmm. And Brussels does not give people that, opportunity to say, hey, look, I'm a subject matter expertise in X, and I'm happy with that. Let me deliver on that. Let me get extremely good at that. Let me deliver that. I'm not a people manager. I don't want to be one. It's not something that interests me. I don't think I have the psychological power to do it, and that's okay. But we in Brussels, unfortunately, make people bosses, people managers, just because of how long they've been in organizations, or how now that you've come to this level of your career, then this is your next step, without really asking that question.
Or if you're just friend with a director.
Correct.
That's another way in.
Correct. Your network, So that's why I when you mentioned that it's a really difficult question, but being a manager, being a people manager, right, is a serious question we should all be asking ourselves. Do I really want that job? Mm-hmm. Because it is, in all honesty, not an add-on. It is not an add-on. Being a people manager, managing people, is the job you're paid to do.
Yeah.
When you're a people manager, that's the job.
And it's very responsible also from the point of the organization to appoint somebody who's not trained to do that.
Correct.
Because they reciprocate like the damage that is with them of not knowing how to do the job is cascaded down to every tiny process of every detail within the organization.
Yeah. And I think we are all young at heart, but I think if there's anybody, young managers or up and coming, or we should all be asking ourselves that question. And it's really unfortunate that my generation or certain people really never ask that question to themselves. Mm-hmm. So ask yourself the question, do I want to eventually be a people manager? And if I do, then I need to genuinely put in the effort to know people better. Like what works with people? What do I want my manager to do for me? What is my manager doing today that I would rather not take on as a managerial person? I would love for the, next generation to kind of ask that question.
I would even go a step further, because I think that people who are in management of managing people should actually be excited about that. Because I know I love working with people, and I also have worked with people who hate working with people, and they've been an excellent employee, but they've been a horrible boss. And they were very, very much aware of that.
Yeah.
And I, on the other, I think that I'm genuinely, authentically excited about how I see the progress of my team members and where I can lead them to be, and what type of features they can develop. But I see them for a filter where I think that's possible, and that's just, I feel very excited about that.
Correct.
And then I would want my manager to be excited about me as well.
Correct.
Like in a professional way.
Correct. Yeah, but that's the thing. That is the core of being a manager.
Yeah.
At the core is you are an enabling boss and you genuinely care about the people who work in your team. So, I remember being around bosses who, I've had some of the, I've had a really good boss who was this enabling force, and your success, my success was her success, and it was just brilliant to kind of see that in action, But then I also had a boss who, it came to the point when I needed to ask, it was going to come to a point that it was not just me, but other people in the organization who needed to ask for a hall pass to go to the bathroom. We didn't get there, but it was the micromanaging. It was still that point where, and unfortunately, Maya, the unfortunate thing is, all these things are not that straightforward. They are packaged in with charisma and knowledge. So a lot of times I had to ask myself the question, am I really in a toxic work environment, or am I just a spoiled brat who wants more? So because I was making excuses for this boss, oh my God, she's charismatic, she's extremely knowledgeable, she's extremely connected. But then work experience-wise, it was a horrific experience, because going through it myself was horrible. But worse was seeing it be somebody else's turn the next week, and then you not being able to do it. And I think people, and that's why A Better Brussels, I'm doing my best to make sure that it is a lot about mental health than about D&I and stuff, because I think it's enormous mental health strain that we put on people when there's a person who's been put in place because of their network, because of their contacts, because they can lead legal texts, really legislative files really well, and come up with positions really well, but don't have the managerial people management skills. That's a big issue, I find, or my experience has been,
And this also puts the organization, I think, in a very difficult state even to recover, because this type of managers, even once they're gone, if we just are in a very critical state and they say, well, they're not going to change, so eventually you need to replace them. I've stepped up after in one organization after a manager like that, who was calling, when he was on a work trip, calling each individual employee to make sure that they're working. And I was like, this is sick. I mean, first of all, this takes so much time. That was my first reaction. And I remember that I think it was during my first 6 months, and I had to be somewhere on a work trip with a few colleagues. And I called within the office on the landline, because I needed something to be electronically signed immediately. And I was in such a hurry, I have forgotten about it. I'm already abroad. And then when I was speaking to the accountant, she was like, do you want me to hand over the phone to the other colleagues? And I was like, no, I just need you to do this immediately. I don't want to talk to anybody. Just please do that. It's my mistake, blah, blah. And she was like, but I've done it already. I was doing it while we were on the phone. Do you want me to hand over the phone so you know? And I found it very weird. And once I was back, I was like, I need to ask you something. What the hell was that? Were you just what happened? And she told me that the previous boss was phoning the landline within the different department just to be sure. And he would be like, so what are you doing? So he would never say, are you at work? But they would all knew. They all knew why he was calling. I was like, this is such a level of insecurity within yourself that you project to the others and stress them to the point where this is ridiculous.
But I ask myself the question, what does this person get by doing this? What do they get? They spend their time calling, they take their inner insecurities, pass it on to the other person, and then they get known for that. And unfortunately, we encourage this behavior. And that's what I'm trying to articulate. What A Better Brussels is about is kind of like we talked about shame changing sides, the receiving end of people, me on the receiving end of this person's micromanagement, should not be ashamed. This is her insecurity. This is her lack of confidence for what God knows what reason on me. And that's why I recently wrote a post about, imagine if employees or potential employees or applicants put forward an applicant's assessment back to during the interview process, because I think people in Brussels are taking their really good old time in the amount of interviews there are, the amount of assessments that happen, and the utter disregard to the unpaid work that applicants do to get the job. And we are really at the borderline of unpaid work. And then I've heard from people who are basically saying, they stole my idea, never hired me,
Wow.
Or they, it was a 5-hour assessment. So with an external agency that they must have spent ridiculous amounts of money on, So I think external assessments, things like that, are a very good thing to kind of, from an employer side, look beyond the CV and the cover letter, right? And beyond your references too. Nothing bad with that. But I think you're really taking that power that you have to the next level. Because as you go through this to find the right candidate, sometimes the receiving end, the applicant, is unemployed. The applicant is applying from scratch in a completely new country like Belgium, and you completely disregard the time, the effort, the pressure, the unpaid work that you're putting these people through.
The cost of it.
Yeah.
When you were describing the shame again and how the power is disbalanced in many cases, where is fear in all of that? So we positioned shame, but where is fear in all of that? Because I think that in many cases people are just afraid to speak up because they know that they'll get in trouble. So they're not ashamed at all, but they're like, yeah, I don't want to go in that at all.
Yeah. I mean, fear is, I can speak about it from the employees' side, is I think from the employee side, we live in a system where we need jobs, and we have created a system. Yeah,
Unfortunately.
I mean, nobody can live off grid today, I mean, people who do, please tell me how you do it. But
they won't be watching the podcast.
But I mean, we live in a world to work, unfortunately. As much as and I would love to hear from people who are doing this bit of working to live and living to work kind of, distinction, and they've mastered this, right? But if our 80% of our lives with retirement age is just increasing like crazy. So if I'm going to work all my life, I need to keep the job. And if I need to keep the job, and I think to myself that the number of people who come from all over Europe and all over the world to live and work in Brussels, around the policymaking space, we are really the elites, because we live in a rather rich, rather protected, rather really good jobs country, in comparison to, and this is our condition here. So
we're
sometimes
afraid not to lose the privilege. That's
why.
And
also we fear what the alternative is, So that's number one. Number two, we fear the fact that we are competing with other people, Like today, majority of us, we go like, okay, if they will fire me, and they will find 25 other people who are just as good.
And they will agree.
Yeah.
To step in.
So you see like where the power dynamics lies, not on the work, but really on the on the employer and the And that doesn't mean that they don't have fear. Like the employers and the organizations, that doesn't mean that they don't have fear. But I think the power is in their hands. So that's why I think the responsibility of good bosses and good people managers really should lie with them, because with that power is coming a real responsibility, you know?
I had a very strange experience with fear when it comes to speaking up your mind, and just even when you are 100% correct, you know you're correct. You have the evidence of like external validation of what you think it's true is being validated by numerous sources. The last time I had to send documents to the court, at this point, my former employer changed the reasoning behind why I was fired. So in the beginning, it was because of the salary, because I kept on asking for more money. And then, like, I think it was an year in the court case, they said that it was just because I was a horrible manager. And I said, but that's great, because I can prove that I wasn't, because I have, like, I had all of those anonymous team surveys, like team engagement questionnaire. I can prove that that was not the case.
Correct.
And my lawyer said, well, just ask some of your colleagues to write a testimony,
Correct.
not against your employer, but just saying,
On a reflection of you.
if they believe you're a good manager, just ask them, would you be willing to write a letter, like a recommendation letter, but vice versa, not from the boss to the... It was really strange, because I had to have like 10, 11 individual conversations. Half of the people I spoke with me cried. And it was horrible, because I felt that I'm pressuring them to do something that I don't want them to feel pressured. And then Diana was like, look, if this is how you feel, I'm not going to ask you to do it at all. And we had a conversation where there were a few colleagues who said, I will write. I know that this will put me in danger, but I will write because I know what happened to you. I know you were right, and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, I received a few letters saying, I'm really afraid that I will get fired. They will find a reason to fire me. And second of all, you know, I'm not from here. So I don't have the luxury to just move into my dad's basement or something like that.
Correct.
I am renting, or I just got a mortgage. I have a young child. I feel very afraid that I'll just be unemployed, and that would look really bad on my resume. And I would not be able to explain that the reason why I was fired and why I cannot pay my mortgage now is because I just wrote a recommendation letter. And this came from like half of my former colleagues.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? Like, if you are in an organization where half of the team is like on the urge of crying when you ask them to tell the truth, this is huge. And this is not good.
Yeah. I mean, I can't share the stories that I get DMs about, but I can share like an example of where there have been times when people I have seen people cry, and that's the beauty of consulting, right? That we are really in the background. Like as freelancers, we are in the background. So I have seen people cry, like a different person cry. There have been instances where people have created a shared document on one person's personal Google Drive to document really toxic behavior. The HR, which in Brussels is very rare to come by in organizations, which happen to have an HR, knew about it, and still nothing is done. So this is the reality we live in Brussels, that you have organizations and people who are suffering, and there are people taking the courage to document these things, and still nothing happens. So that's why I always say, and I go back to shame changing sides, right? Is when people think for a moment that let me put this thing in that shared document, print screen or whatever they put in there, right? They have asked themselves 1,000 times the question, is this really that wrong? Like, or am I just so gullible that I fell for all this gossip that's going on? Or Am I trying to be one of the people, like, or is this really that bad? Because like when it was happening to me, I made multiple excuses for this person who was doing this to me. Multiple excuses. Like I mentioned, I thought to myself, she's charismatic. She's a woman. I want to be on her side.
People like her.
People like her, but she's connected in Brussels. She does really important work. She's beyond belief good at her job. So
it must be me.
It must be me.
Yeah.
It's
not you.
And so
not you.
and I just want people to understand that when HR receives this, or when me as a boss, I receive this feedback, know that people are thinking 1,000 times before they take that step. Sure, there is an element of gossip in there. Sure, people want to feel part of a group. We are all community people. People want to see that, yes, I had that experience too, and maybe they may exaggerate something. But at the core, they have asked themselves the question, is it really true? Like, is this person really that bad? And then they make the decision, and then there have been times for that one case that I'm telling you about is where people were saying, no, that's not been my experience. I'm happy because my situation is changing, because I have a new boss, or I have a new, my role has changed. I'm happy. Or people have said, look, I need to take care of my mental health. I don't want to be involved in this anymore. I gave you guys as much as I can, but I need to take a step back. So know that there is all this background work and thinking that goes on before people come and take it forward. And then I think on top of that, there is the courage part. And I know you don't like thinking of it as courage, but I think it is rather ballsy to do it in the really close-knit community that we are, Brussels, right? That we...
No, I agree, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because it means that you're opening doors for the conversation while you're closing most of your doors career-wise.
Correct.
And I think that I consciously took this decision because also, if I have to be completely honest, I don't want to work in that if this is it.
Correct.
So if the doors will close for me, be it.
Correct.
These doors should open when they are good enough, as your
Correct.
colleagues from the Good Enough company will say. If this is the content behind the door, leave it closed.
Yeah, and there's a message here to the people who are listening is look at the talent that Brussels loses out on. Because people are saying, if this is where I need to work, sorry, thank you very much, I'm gone, And then imagine what we are left with, is our people who
fresh meat.
Not
fresh meat is what we're left with.
And yes-sayers. Fresh meat and yes-sayers, right? And that's why I always, like I was speaking to somebody recently where I said, the Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all these stories, right? It took somebody to step up and tell that story 20 years later for something to happen.
Ugh.
And it was the freaking courage of like the one or two women, right? For this to happen. And it came to the point where their entire livelihood became about them taking a stand against these abusers, And the audacity of us, and I include myself in this, of taking people granted for saying, oh, when it comes to sexual harassment, I get it. Me too. Oh, yeah, that is unacceptable. But when it comes to mental
abuse is fine.
Mental abuse is fine. Yeah, I'm okay. Oh, yeah, she's just making excuses.
Just a spoiled brat.
It's not as bad as people make it sound. Oh, how dare you use the word toxicity, No.
I think that the mental load that's left after a situation, be it a gender pay gap, a toxic workplace, abusive manager, this to me, it meant that I questioned my own worth as a human, not as a worker. And I think that this is also in parallel with when the Better Brussels started, I started my own campaign, which is Be Disappointing, the other end of it. And it comes from my former employer. One of the representatives called me disappointing because I kept on asking for my salary explanation. And it echoes in my head every day. So this is why I thought it's to reframe it, I need to have the campaign called like that. And there is a part on the website where people share stories. All of the stories, they happen in Bulgaria, in Germany, in France, in the UK, everywhere. All of them have this same sentence in common in a different shape. I lost myself and I started to question myself on what my worth, my value, me as a mother, me as a parent, everything just collapsed. And I think that this is why we need to really focus that mental abuse done by toxic managers, done by toxic employers, is something that needs to be vocally put on the table. Correct. Do you agree with that or do you disagree with that? Correct. Not taking a stand is taking sides. Is not just, you cannot not take sides in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have nothing to say other than you're spot on.
Okay, but what's the future for Better Brussels?
It is open at the moment. There is nothing concrete I can share. Like I mentioned, people are really providing really good input. They see the value of it. They are, it feels like something has started. And I don't want to give a Better Brussels only the credit. I think it's a lot to do with you, the Good Enough Company, the Empower EU people, the Harassment Support Network, DNI people.
Have a party. No, because I'm sorry to just spit it out like that, but we've only been working. We should have a party, all of the people that you just.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that all these initiatives have started is really should be a wake up call to people to ask themselves, what's going on here? And I'm glad that Politico covered it and said, what's going on here? That people are taking this thing in their hands.
Good Politico.
Yeah, but so to answer your question, what's next for a Better Brussels? I don't know. For all the trashing I have to say that we did to Brussels EU policymaking space, I have to say that the listening sessions really, people genuinely in Brussels when they come to these kind of spaces really are filled with serious talent. Serious talent. The reason why I cannot in any strong sense share where a Better Brussels is going is because the ideas are beyond belief strong. There are people who are saying, let's do this, let's do that, let's do that. And they're saying, I'm not saying you do that. I will do that. I will take a role. Nice. I recently met with somebody for drinks who ended up being an ambassador who said, look, I want to play a role. I have some time, free time for myself. I want to do this. How can we do it? And we brainstormed and he came up with the idea and now he's running with it. So what I'm trying to say is for all the bashing that I'm doing of Brussels, know that there is incredible talent here. People genuinely who are interested in doing something around it, right? And let's not miss out on that. Let's not miss out and disappoint them and let them go back to their bubbles and say never again or never recommend Brussels as a place to work. Mm-hmm. And for all the things that we tell in our position papers is for Europe's competitive edge, for Europe to compete at a global stage, let's make sure that in Brussels where we are, we do that well. So that Brussels eventually becomes a place that people recommend and say, hey, look,
Mm-hmm. I think that this also adds on to the value of the political value of Brussels, because I will be very honest, to me, Brussels had more political importance and value before I moved here. And I need to work on my own disappointment with... I recently had an interview where I had to describe, and the journalist asked me about my court case, everything, and they asked me about what was the turning point for me. when I was like, okay, I will fight for this. And I was in a conference where I had to deliver a speech in front of like 300 and something people on the decent pay in social services and the human rights field.
Yeah.
And I had to do this while I was severely underpaid. And that creates such like a nearly schizophrenic reality, because you go and you're like, you people should do this, 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 and this, and then we should fight for this, this, and this. And then in the back of my head, there is this tiny voice and like, haha, but what about you? You're a subject of this policy,
Correct.
which did not, you
Correct.
don't meet the criteria
Correct.
of your own speech, you
Correct.
hypocrite. What are
Correct.
you doing? So the political value of Brussels suffers when Brussels is not being on the level it should be.
Yeah. And one of the ways I think can do that is not let the responsibility only fall on civil society,
Absolutely.
human rights organizations.
Absolutely.
I think, and I've written about this also, about the D&I disconnect in EU policymaking, on how companies, EU policymakers, all this, like for example, I can speak from a company point of view because I've been a co-chair of a company's women's network. And I was thinking there's such incredible know-how within companies.
Mm-hmm.
There are resource groups, there are efforts that are happening. They're asking themselves the question. People are calling, employees within companies are calling their companies bluff, right? So it shakes them a little bit. They focus so much on reputational risk. And then they come to Brussels and they forget. They forget how their trade associations are run. What are their trade associations doing on this topic of mental health, D&I? And are my values on those topics implemented when I become a member of this trade body? Completely. I have never had, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I am disconnected, but at least my experience has been that sometimes some really good know-how remains at the company level and it never reaches trade bodies, because we all know that in the objective scales or priority thing, trade bodies is like maybe 5-10% of people's work, company representatives' work, because they have their own objectives.
Until it's drained down, it's watered down.
Correct. Yeah. And also there's such incredible know-how. Why wouldn't you call that out in the trade bodies that operate for you, speak for you towards EU institutions, you know? So don't...
It shouldn't only be put on the civil side. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that it's also valid that there is a lot of examples and good practices and good stories we can take from the corporate world, which if you asked me to say this 5 years ago, I would be shocked to hear myself say that.
Correct.
But in the couple of last years, I actually worked with so many actually decent companies.
Correct.
And the corporate world is not what I thought was.
Correct.
And on the other hand, the civil side was not what I thought it was as
Correct.
well.
Correct.
So I think that we should somehow try to branch out both of the existing worlds. And I think that there is a lot to learn from each other.
Correct.
And institutions somehow should reflect that.
Yeah, and I think maybe these conversations, if we don't have them, nobody realizes it's an issue, you know? So hopefully this helps in some way.
Well, I think it's helping me for sure. Okay. Well, I always try to wrap up the interviews with the same question of what makes you happy and what makes you hopeful. So these are the two sides of the same question.
Yeah. I think what makes me happy is on this topic is what I mentioned, that there is some really good talent, thinking, and people who are really self-aware, you know, that take and at least come and visit the listening sessions, and maybe they don't want to contribute, but at least see where that conversation is going. What's this about, you know? And that's all I can ask for. But the number of people that come to these things, share their stories, because it's really not comfortable talking about your experience, sharing your vulnerability, where you really know that you're going to sound like you're nagging, you know? And because we are in such a close-knit community, I can imagine the courage it takes for these people to share the story and be like, but that's not all that is about me. This is not my only story, you know? So I love it when people, so that makes me really hopeful. And I knew that it existed somewhere. So I'm happy that the listening sessions kind of provides an environment that people can come and not be judged, and tell their story, hear other people going through something similar, So I hope to continue these things. I just do understand that people want to know where A Better Brussels will go eventually. I don't know right now.
You also are part of those people.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I want to take my time in figuring that out. That's number one. Number two, what makes me hopeful is, of course, these people, but I'm very happy with the young generations, because they are really asking some very tough questions, and I hope that we as managers, as people managers, as sort of people who are vocal about certain issues, give them the space to do that, to figure out what would they like in the future for them, and so I'm happy and hopeful about sort of the younger generations, and I hope we enable these people to take it forward.
Wow, it's good that at least the knowledge exists out in the open, and I think that it's up to everyone to grab it in their own time and conditions. Because I also know that it's not an easy topic, the one that we're discussing today, and it's not for everyone all the time. So correct. I think that it takes time and it takes an effort to really open up these quite scary topics. Yeah. So thank you for doing that, not only today, but also through your work in Better Brussels. And I'm very happy to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Same to you.
Wow. Hopefully this was as exciting for you as it was for us. I'm really happy that I'm keep on having these conversations, and I won't give up on having them until things change. This podcast started around a year ago, where I really decided that I want to put my anger and frustrations into something constructive, because anger is not a constructive place to exist, and you can have it for a while, but then it starts eating you up.
Correct.
So this podcast is still my small protest and my small revolution towards what I believe the EU bubble should be. And it should be a better Brussels. It should be a better EU bubble in order to have a better EU and a better world. So thank you for sticking with us in this last hour. And enjoy life, be kind, hug your dog, and be better,
It's
Brussels.
True. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.